Hello everyone, hope all of you are fine and doing well. In today's video, I am going to read and critically analyze Sir Philip Sidney's sonnet, Loving in Truth. It is a requested video because Shongita, one of my dear old students, requests me to make a video on Loving in Truth. So let's begin this talk. Sir Philip Sidney was born in 1554. He was 10 years senior to William Shakespeare. He was actually a very renowned Elizabethan sonneteer, courtman, man of letters, prose writer, and a versatile genius. He died very young at the age of 32 in the year 1586. He was a Renaissance man in Elizabethan England. He was a patron to many poets. Edmund Spenser dedicated his Shepherd's Calendar to Philip Sidney. But it's very interesting to note that none of his works were published during his lifetime. All of his writings were published posthumously. For his wonderful sonneteering skill, Sidney is also known as the Petrarch of England. He was a part of an erudite circle in Elizabethan England, and the group was known as Areopagus Group. His famous prose romance is Arcadia. He is also known for his critical work, An Apology for Poetry. He wrote it in 1595. An Apology for Poetry was a strong defense for poetry because Puritan authors like many Puritan authorities, especially Puritan author Stephen Gasson, he attacked poetry and he called poets and their endeavors are futile. In order to defend poetry, Sir Philip Sidney wrote An Apology for Poetry in 1595. In his Apology for Poetry, he classified poetry into three broad categories: religious poetry, philosophical poetry, and poetry of the imaginative nature. And according to Philip Sidney, this kind of imaginative poetry is the best type of poetry. His Loving in Truth is a sonnet, and basically it is an imaginative poetry. Therefore, according to Sidney's notion, it is one of the best types of poetry. So his poem Loving in Truth belongs to this third category of poetry. It is a sonnet. Generally speaking, Loving in Truth is a sonnet as it contains 14 lines, and the theme is also a typical Elizabethan sonneteering theme. It is the first sonnet in Sidney's epoch-making sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella. Sidney finished the sonnet sequence in 1582. 108 sonnets are there in the sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella. Following the Elizabethan sonneteering tradition, Sidney too dedicated his sonnet sequence to his beloved or lady love, Mrs. Penelope Reach. Sidney was supposed to marry Penelope, but due to sudden unexpected turn of events, their marriage did not take place in reality. Later, Penelope got married to Robert Reach, a lord in London. Sidney's unrequited love for his beloved gets reflected in each sonnet of Astrophel and Stella. Astrophel is a Greek name meaning a star lover, and Stella is a Latin word. It implies the star. Here Sidney metaphorically calls himself the star lover, while his lady love Penelope is the star as implied by the word stellar. The unrequited passion of the poet for his lady love and the impossibility of their union get reflected throughout the name. The distance between a star lover and a star is unbridgeable. The distance can only be covered imaginatively. In reality, the distance cannot be bridged. So from the very beginning, Sidney implies the impossibility and futility of his passion and devotion for his lady love. In the sonnet sequence, there is a Homeric echo also. Penelope was Odysseus' wife in Homer's epic Odyssey. During the prolonged absence of Odysseus from his homeland, many suitors of Ithaca came to woo Penelope, and they were 108 in number. It has been suggested that the 108 sonnets represent the 108 suitors in Homer's Penelope, who played a game of trying to hit a stone called Penelope Stone as a way of deciding who would win and court her. Just as the wooers banked on their fate pathetically and were aware of disappointment, so is Astrophel embarking on the same disappointing and painful journey. Let me read the poem and summarize it first, then I'd love to critically interpret the poem. By the way, the rhyme scheme of the poem is ABAB, ABAB, CD CD, and the couplet is EE. So let me read the poem first, then I will critically analyze it. Loving in truth and fain in verse, my love to show. So the poet is saying he loves his lady love truly and he wants to articulate his love through his verse, through his love poem. That she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain, so that his lady love might take some pleasure out of his poetic pain. But at the same time, there is a satire that the lady is a little bit cruel, who might take pleasure out of his pain. Pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know. So, out of pleasure, she might read his love poem. After reading the poem, she might know about the poet's unrequited love for her. Knowledge might pity win and pity grace often. So, the knowledge about the poet's unrequited love might make her pity the poet. And out of her pity, the poet would be able to have some kind of grace. I thought fit words to paint the blackest face of woe. The poet is saying he was looking for perfectly befitting words to portray his lovelorn state. Blackest face of woe means sadness or difficult mental situation. So the poet wants to paint, wants to portray his innermost sufferings or sadness through his poem. Studying inventions fine, her wits to entertain. So, in order to entertain his mistress, he was studying various love poems. Oft turning others' lips. Oft turning others' lips means often rummaging through the existing body of romantic literature or other poets' love expressions so that they can inspire him to write an equally good love poem for his lady love. To see if thence would flow some fresh and fruitful showers upon my sunburnt brain. To see, he wants to see after consulting, after reading other poets' works, that if they can give him some kind of inspiration so that from his sunburnt brain, from his poetically infertile brain, that is one kind of poetic humility. I will be exploring this theme later on within the due course of my talk. So the poet is saying that from his sunburned brain, from his infertile brain, he can get some kind of inspiration from his fellow poets. But words came halting forth, wanting invention stay. Invention nature's child, fled step dim studies blows. So he's saying, after consulting other poets' works, in a very halting manner, he has been able to write a poem for his lady love. Invention is a nature's child. So critically interpreting or reading others' works is a critical and scholastic work, which is a very critical activity, and it is a very difficult thing. And invention is something which comes out of your mind. So invention is the natural thing. It is nature's child. Slade, step, dem, studies blow. So study carefully interpreted works of others, careful study of others' works are generally considered as the study which is very artificial in nature, and it is metaphorically compared to a stepmother. So, a child would love to flee from a stepmother. So, invention and carefully constructed reading of other poetic works, all these things are in antithetical position here. And others' feet still seem but strangers in my way. Others' feet means others' poetic expressions look very or seem very inappropriate in order to express or articulate the poet's emotions for his lady love. Thus great with child to speak, and helpless in my throes, biting my truant pain, beating myself for spite. Thus great with child to speak means he has been able to conceive something poetically so that he can convey his feelings for his beloved. He was helpless, he was looking, he was groping for suitable diction or vocabulary. Biting my truant pen. So he was biting his pen. Truant pen is a very rhetorical device. It is an example of hyperledge or transferred epithet. Here the pen is not truant. The poet's mind is truant or wayward, who is unable to follow his own emotions and unable to paint them perfectly through words. Fool, said my muse to me, look in thy heart and write. So when the poet was groping for suitable words, he was biting his own pen and he was imaginatively, he was beating himself. That time his muse comes. Here muse is his alter ego, his creative alter ego, who tells him, who murmurs these words to his ears that he should look into his own heart and find poetic inspiration and suitable poetic gestures from his heart only. So this is the summary of the poem. This is a roughly drawn summary of the poem, but I will be exploring each of this theme and the expressions in detail. See, the essence of sonneteering theme is love or supplication for love. As far as sonneteering history is concerned, it is the male lover who is supplicating the love of his mistress. In Petrarchan sonnets, the lover is tearful or sad for the cruelty or coldness of the lady. The typical English sonnet, be it that of Watt or Shakespeare, presents a virile male lover who is lashing back the lady for her deceptive nature. Sir Philip Sidney, in his sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella, is no exception, striking the typical English masculine note to portray a lady love who might take some pleasure of his pain. This is a characteristic note of satire that lends Sidney's loving in truth a dramatic gusto, although a sonnet is generically a variant of lyric. Sidney's Loving in Truth is like a typical Elizabethan sonnet, and it is confessional and autobiographical in nature. There is a hint of satire in this confessional statement that lovers are not always sincere and truthful in their confessions or professions of love. But the I person of the poem, the poet's voice in the poem, professes love for the mistress as deep and sincere. The following words suggest that his mistress presumably does not pay heed to his words of love or requited his love. Therefore, he longs for articulating his passion through poetry. Okay, I think the most important and interesting thing in this sonnet is that Loving in Truth is a poet's attempt to profess his love to his lady love. It is the pang of inarticulation or any frank professing of love to his mistress that drives the poet to write a poem. In the poem, Sidney portrays the pathos of an unrequited lover. He is painfully inarticulate in professing his love to his mistress. Therefore, he writes the verse to convey his emotion, his passion for his lady love. His love is the pang of inarticulate passion. Therefore, it is the pain of love that he wants to paint in order to soften the lady's cruelty into pity and grace. Woman's pain or sadness here springing from unreciprocated love. Woe is portrayed in terms of personification. It is personified as a person with the blackest face. Black is the color of mourning and sadness. The poet here follows the Elizabethan convention of poetic humility. Therefore, in writing the verse of his pain of unrequited love, he feels short of appropriate diction and gropes for fit words to articulate his feeling of pain to paint the blackest face of woe. In this confession, the idea is embedded that words are mere verbal signs or gestures, and therefore they cannot match the depth and intensity of a lover's feeling. So he was rummaging through the existing body of literature, through the pages of literature to find an adequate vocabulary to express his pain of love to the lady. He calls his brain sunburnt. It means parched or withered. It is again the poet's humble confession of poetic humility or sterility or poetic infertility. To write a verse that would be able to win the lady's grace and love. The hopelessness of sunburnt brain is pitted against the hope of fresh and fruitful showers, which metaphorically mean the shower of creativity. The muse here is not an outer muse. The muse here is, interestingly, the symbolic embodiment of the poet's alter ego, as I have already mentioned. So his creative alter ego murmurs to his ears that the fountain spring of poetry is not other lips, but his own heart. He must look within, dig into his heart, and find there all the fit words for his poetic verse. So, in the sonnet, basically, the major themes that we come across are creativity, because poetry is something. Here, a theory of poetry is also being pointed out by Sir Philip Sidney, because Sidney believed that poetry is a spontaneous action. It must come from a poet's heart. Therefore, studying other poets' works, following their theories and methods, might not help a poet. Therefore, in order to be a poet, somebody needs to feel the natural urge to create spontaneously. So poetry is a very spontaneous activity. Poetry comes from your own heart. Poetry is a pure emotion. It cannot be taught. Therefore, the art of writing poetry is an intrinsic ability of a poet. Therefore, in this poem, we find an interesting theory of poetry, the genesis of poetry, as he pointed out through these lines, that poetry is a very natural, spontaneous activity. And most importantly, the second theme in the poem is love versus immortality. In all the Shakespearean love sonnets also, we always find that the lady love is being immortalized, as she has been addressed many times in many ways in the sonnet. So, the aesthetic medium is the best medium for a poet to immortalize one's beloved. So this theme is very common among the Elizabethan sonnetteers in England. And also in Italy, in the Petrarchan sonnet also we find the same tradition, that the male lover, the poet, the I persona, is actually trying to immortalize the beloved or the lady love. Therefore, they are mentioning their names, they are dedicating their poems to the lady love, so that their mortal entity can find an immortal one through the verse. Therefore, poetry has the power to immortalize someone. So, in his defense of poetry, also Sidney talks about this kind of same proposition, that poetry has the power to immortalize someone. So here, the art of poetry, its power, its theory, again, all these things have been elaborately discussed in the poem. And also, the theme of love is very important here. Here, love is essentially a platonic love. Here, it is one-sided, unrequited, unreciprocated love, where the male lover or the I person of the poem or the poet himself is the lover. He suffers from the pang of unrequited love. He longs for the lady's love and passion and emotion, but that is not something which he can easily get, because as I have already mentioned from the biographical information, that Penelope de Vaux or Mrs. Penelope Rich was a married woman. He was married to Lord Rich that time. Therefore, cherishing some kind of amorous passion for a married woman was considered as a heresy in the 16th century Elizabethan England. Therefore, the journey, the quest to win the favor, grace, and love from his lady love is a futile endeavor that is reflected in the poem. Therefore, ultimately, if you look at the other sonnets in the same group, Astrophel and Stella, you would find that it is the lover's despair, it is the lover's despondency that takes a pathetic note in all these existing sonnets of this collection. I hope you will find this video very useful because I have tried to provide interesting critical interpretations, and I have merged with my interesting critical interpretations biographical details and interesting facts related to Sydney's own life and his creativity. So keep watching my videos and do like, share and subscribe my channel, and do let me know on which topic you want me to make my next video. I'll be looking forward to listening from you. Hope all of you would be fine. Take care. Bye bye.